This is Nice Guy Eddie, and you're listening to Rainbow Radio. In My Humble Opinion is coming up next. My guest tonight is the leading actress in the new animated series Gen Zed. It's my pleasure to welcome Julie Rei Goldstein. Julie, welcome to the program.
Thanks. Thank you for having me.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about Gen Zed? What is this all about?
Sure. So about myself, I'm a voice actress and an on-camera actress. I've been working in the industry for probably about a decade now.
Oh.
As for Gen Zed, it's an animated project. It's about 4 online gamers who end up moving in together. 3 of them have known each other for quite a while, and they all have pretty terrible backgrounds, and they need to get out of their situation as quick as possible, and they figure, hey, why not move in together? And our 4th main character, Betsy, kind of joins them later on as she starts as a means to pay the rent, but they end up finding out that she actually plays the same game that they do, and so the things end up better than they expected.
Okay. So you mentioned the 4 characters, and I know a little bit about, because I've seen the trailer, so I know a little bit about the characters. But it would be, maybe you could describe the 4 characters, because it's an interesting bunch. It's an interesting cast.
Yeah, certainly, and they've got very interesting backgrounds to them, for sure. Each character is moving out and basically has to end up in this situation because of something in their background. Okay. First of all, we have Cameron, who sadly he's a product of the LA foster care system, and he's been abused both emotionally and physically by foster parents over the years, and he as well suffers from body issues. He's unfortunately doesn't have, because of the emotional abuse that he's experienced, he doesn't have a very positive opinion of himself. So part of his background is he's a software engineer, and he wants to create an advanced AI that will love him like a real person, kind of like the movie Her. Okay. We also have Huey, who he comes from a background of his mother died when he was very young, and his father is an alcoholic and watches nothing but Fox News 24/7, so you can imagine the kind of background that he grew up in. Okay. We have Betsy, who kind of shows up later on. She's not part of the bunch when we meet them in the first episode, but she does end up with this group of misfits because she's a trustafarian, and she's looking for a group of people to live with, and she kind of has her own issues because of the fact that her parents haven't shown her attention over the years, and their way of showing attention to her was throwing money at her. Right. So we have definite issues coming from all this bunch, and Shona, of course, her issue is she's trans and her parents don't accept her, and she needs to get out of this toxic environment very, very quickly because her parents actually give her an ultimatum, and in a very joking way, as we put it in the trailer.
Oh, God, that was awful. Oh my God!
They throw an intervention, which they call intertransitional homosexual turnaround fiesta, which I just love the way we came up with that.
Well, and it's worth saying at this point, because you've got Cameron, who is abused and depressed, Huey, who is he has a lot of anger issues and comes from a somewhat broken home. You know, Betsy, who's been neglected, Shona, who's trans, and also has the parents who don't accept her. This is a comedy, I should point out.
Yeah. Well, Shona definitely puts it right out there in the pilot. The way she states it is she wants to be part of her background is she wants to be a stand-up comedian, and the reason for that is because she's kind of seen the way the world treats trans people and trans women in specific, and she's kind of come to a place where she's realized, if I can't laugh at this can we swear?
Oh, yes, yeah.
Oh, okay. So basically, she literally says, if we can't laugh at this shit, then, we'll just go crazy. So we might as well make a comedy out of it.
I'll have to introduce her to Ashley Messer, who I had on the show a couple weeks ago, just to give a shout out to a prior guest. But so, how did you hear about this project? What how are you brought into the fray here?
Hayden contacted me, I want to say it was around late September, early October of last year, being 2014. Mm-hmm. He was working on this project. He was kind of getting ready to do a bunch of table reads to bring kind of tighten the script. And he was really looking specifically for a trans voice actress to play Shona. He's very, very adamant and, I guess, concerned, although that's probably not the best of words, about representation.
Sure.
And everything that he shows on the screen, he wants to make sure that that minority is represented in behind the microphone.
Right. So he wasn't considering any cis actors or actresses to play this role then?
Absolutely not. From my understanding, and I was actually the first person who read for this role. I went in for the first table read, and he kind of just loved what I was doing with her and asked me pretty much immediately after that first table read, hey, do you want to stick around with the project? And it kind of jumped from actors to actors throughout the process of doing table reads, but I was pretty much there from the get-go. I was pretty much the first one nailed down, thankfully. You
mentioned you'd been in the business for about a decade now. So what were some of the other projects that you'd done prior to this?
I've been working both behind the microphone in voiceover in video games and specifically anime. Okay. I've worked on shows like Magical Girl, Lyrical Nanoha, probably something. Again, if you're into anime, you probably know these titles.
I'm into anime. I've not seen that one. The name is vaguely familiar, but I've kind of been out of it for a year or two now. But no, I'm a huge anime fan actually. So we'll have to compare notes afterwards, unless you want to name off a couple others and see if I.
Oh well, I've been in quite a couple. I've been in Paradise Kiss. I was in Nanoha. I was in Tweenie Witches. Eureka 7, which is actually one of my favorite shows.
Who'd you play in Eureka 7?
I was actually a bunch of background characters.
Oh, okay.
That I didn't actually have. That was probably the first job that I worked after moving to LA. So I got to play like all these background characters, and through that I got my first named character in Paradise Kiss, thankfully.
Okay, cool.
I've also worked in video games. I worked on Magna Carta 2. I've worked on Magin and the Forsaken Kingdom, and I did my first MMO about 2 or 3 years ago, PlanetSide 2, which I was really thankful for because I play MMOs, so to actually voice an MMO was pretty cool.
So, well, I guess in that vein, then, is the game that they play in the show? Is there a specific name to it? Is it based on something? And then I was also going to ask you, what's your favorite MMO?
Oh, the game in the show is called Bugs, and it's very much a space combat. The main part of the game is space combat, and that's a lot of what we see in the pilot. I don't know everything about the show because I don't write it. Hayden is the
and we got to be careful about spoilers. So feel free to just say spoilers if I'm going into forbidden territory there.
Oh, not at all. I can just tell you what I've read or what we've recorded in the pilot episode.
Got it.
But yeah, we've recorded a lot of the space combat sequences. There's a lot of space combat. Hayden has alluded to the fact that there is a little more beyond space combat, but I don't know the specifics. As for myself, kind of in that vein, my game of choice right now is Star Wars: The Old Republic. I've been playing it for probably 2 or 3 years now. Shortly after launch, I started playing it and started playing regularly with a guild about 1.5 years ago, and that's kind of takes up most of my leisure times.
Well, that's exactly, you know what? I love video games in general. I love MMOs, but I'm an addict and I got to stay away. Because I've sat down to even ones that, I mean, the last one that I was really involved in, it was RuneScape, and that'll tell you how long it's been. But, you sit down on Friday and you wake up on Monday and you're like, fuck did the weekend go? What happened? It's like, okay, I can't do this. This isn't sustainable.
That happens to me a lot with RPGs because I play a lot of Final Fantasy games and Kingdom Hearts and that kind of stuff. So they're very story-centric. So it's like you started and you just can't let it go. It's like, I need to know what happens next.
They intentionally don't put save points in there, like good stopping points. It's like there's always something ongoing, right?
I was playing, I think it was Alien Isolation recently, and that game is the worst for save points. I think I was playing it for like 2 hours just to find a place to stop so I could go to bed.
That was
terrible.
The first one of those back, and this is going back to college. This would be like early 90s. It was Civilization. And there is no save point. I mean, you could save it at any point, but you're just like going and going and going and going and going. And it was like I installed it on my computer at night. I woke up the next morning still playing it. I'm going, okay, delete this shit. This isn't going to work.
That's kind of the epitome of what we've gotten to with mobile gaming, where it's just like click here a couple minutes for hours a day and just let it run in the background.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, well, and is it me or like if you leave your phone in the car, a 2-minute line, like at Subway or whatever, seems like hours, right? Like, oh God, I don't have my phone. What am I going to do for 3 minutes?
I'm playing probably like 3 or 4 mobile games consistently right now, and it's terrible because it's like sometimes during the day I'm trying to have conversations with people.
Oh, you still try that?
I can't help but being on the other side of my mind going like, oh my God, I gotta get my crops.
Yeah. Oh, I can't, I gotta stay with the crop games. Just piss me off because it's like I always miss it by a few minutes. I'm like, oh, hell with this. I don't do crop games. I install them so I can get like the free stuff for the other game and then I just delete them. I can't do crop
Scarily
games.
enough, my crop game right now is The Walking Dead. It's because you're like building a civilization, and one of the ways you get energy is by building crops. And so it's like that's how I know about crops. It's not like this farm bill or something like that.
Oh God. Okay, so we gotta get back to the show. So curious. So with some of your previous voice work and I guess I was going to ask this about you more personally, but I guess professionally as well. How open or out were you prior to this project?
I've probably been out about 2 or 3 years. Before that, people knew about me, and it was kind of a weird situation because I think a lot of us kind of had a turning point. My turning point started with Candace Cain's role in Dirty Sexy Money, which I think was about 2008. Before that point, I actually completely shied away from camera work. I was like, there's no place for me in the camera world. I don't even want to deal with it. So I just dedicated myself purely to voiceover. And then after seeing her in that show, I kind of realized, wait a minute, maybe there is a place for us. And I started getting back into camera work, but I wasn't open.
Right. Okay.
And I stayed that way.
You were, I mean, not to apologize, if you were taking male roles then, or female roles, or?
No, female roles.
Okay,
I wasn't open, but I feel old nowadays because I transitioned or kind of got through most of my initial issues when I was a teenager. Okay. So it's been a long time.
Right. Okay. Oh, well, because I'm curious, I was curious because now, of course, this is really first, as it says in the trailer, first trans actress in a lead role in an animated series. So that's for what it's worth, that's a historical milestone. I mean, that's you now. That's pretty cool. I mean, I'm curious. So people are going to know who you are now. And also, does that being in that place for that point of representation, does that put any pressure on you?
I don't feel as much pressure on myself because I kind of feed off of what other people have done before me. And in voiceover specifically, on camera, there are more than a couple of us currently going around and starting to make the rounds ever since, Laverne Cox entered the mainstay. Yep. But in voiceover, it's still probably about 2 or 3 of us. The trans voice actress who has been most prominent throughout history was actually Maddie Blaustein, who played Meowth back on Pokemon.
Oh, yeah.
And even though she was a main character, she wasn't the lead. And sadly, there's a lot to discuss there, which I feel like I've been the only one discussing for years. And now suddenly that there are concern trolls out there for Gen Zed. They're starting to talk about Maddie Blaustein, but they don't actually know what she actually experienced in the industry, which is very concerning to me because the state of the industry after she came out and how they reacted to her is kind of why she didn't work as much as she should have before she passed away, sadly.
Well, I guess it's probably worth getting into that a little bit because I'm actually not familiar with this story. I would imagine there's some people out there that aren't. I mean, what do you think that it's changed at all since then?
I think it has changed. I think there's still a lot of people who don't want to actually say things out loud. But there are those biases that happen, in the back of people's heads. There more so, I think in animation, there aren't very specific concerns or attempts at representation just because animation is still mostly seen as either a place to make jokes of minorities or a kid's realm. It's kind of one of the two, where you have like the Adult Swim and the Fox animation domination stuff, and then on the other hand you have like the Adventure Time and the Steven Universe.
Right.
So there's very little that's actually trying to be realistic or make a real attempt at representation.
Sure.
So there hasn't been that attempt as there has been in live action. So there hasn't been that many places for people to find their place, as a lot of trans actresses and actors have done in the on-camera world. And especially with Maddie, kind of what most people don't know is that she wasn't open, even though she was transitioning and to some people was out in the industry for a long time throughout the audition process, and for a couple of years on Pokemon she actually wasn't out. She was doing things still like binding her breast because she had breasts. She was a trans woman. And years after she was working on the show and she came out, and after she'd been working, sadly, she didn't get very much work beyond working with 4Kids. 4Kids, thankfully, was very receptive to her, and I think partially that was because she had established such a really good relationship with them on Pokemon.
Right.
But part of what actually scared me, and this was kind of my wake-up call, this was around 2006, 2007 when Maddie was still alive, is I was still kind of new to LA, and I was meeting producers and giving out my demos and trying to actually get work and auditions. And I was at a convention, and a producer for another studio that wasn't 4Kids, a studio in LA, was asked about working with Maddie, and someone was saying, it's like, oh, we realized that she was in this video game and now you haven't worked with her. Is she going to work with you on anything soon? And I don't think either he didn't realize that I was in the room, or he didn't know that I was trans at the time, because I wasn't working with him at the time, honestly. But he actually said out loud, I can't work with her since she medically transitioned because her voice changed. Even though she had actually gone through, she started hormone therapy years before she was on Pokemon. She was like, this has nothing to do with her voice.
Plus, if she's playing the character of Meowth, let me guess, she didn't sound like that normally. I mean, if you're playing you're playing a character in animation. That's very. I guess nothing surprised. I mean, nothing about discrimination is going to surprise me anymore. But I am surprised a little bit that, just from a pragmatic standpoint, that the voice work wouldn't be more open to that. Because, I mean, first of all, any voice fits the character, and you have women playing men and men playing women, and that it doesn't really matter. And that's current situation. I mean, Bart Simpson's voiced by a woman, for example. There's dozens of examples like that. And it's like, and yet I don't know. That's a shame.
I think there's a lot of untalked about prejudice that goes.
Oh yeah.
That's going on behind the scenes. And one thing that I point a lot of people to is I really want people to hear Maddie in her own words, and there's very little of that out there. There's another podcast out there called Transponder, and they unfortunately haven't been podcasting for a couple years, but back in, I think it was 2006 or 2007, they did probably the longest interview that I've ever found with Maddie, and she very much specifically talks about that entire experience, not just on Pokemon, but after she came out, before she came out, even within 4Kids, she was having to push to audition for female characters because she knew she could do it, because she was a trans woman.
Yeah, exactly.
And they kind of had a little bit of a backlash and didn't want her to do that. And then when she came out, even though nothing had changed with her medically, she had just came out. Suddenly they didn't want her auditioning for men, and she had to push to audition for men, even though like nothing had changed with her talent. Or
like last week she was voicing a male role, and now she can't. For what?
Yeah. God. So it's scary that you hear that, and you think there wouldn't be that type of bias, but there still is. And I think, sadly, there's a lot that you don't hear about just because there's very little feedback that actors get. Actually, one of my acting coaches, has pretty much told me, it's like, if you're auditioning for a guy, you know, if you want to try to get around that, if you're auditioning for a male character, submit it under a male name that's not yours, like a pseudonym.
Right.
And then if you're auditioning for a female character, then put your name on it.
Right.
But don't give them the chance to have that bias, because it does happen.
Sure. Wow. All right, now I'm a little bit curious, and hopefully not getting into too much into spoiler territory. But I'm
Sure.
I'm curious about getting back to the show. I'm curious about how much does the fact that the character is trans, that Shona's character is trans. How much does that play into the story? Is it sort of like other than what was in the trailer? Are they addressing a lot of trans issues head on, or does it aim for more of a normalizing approach? Where her transness becomes more of a background detail. I mean, I know you mentioned that she's sort of a stand-up comic and or a wannabe stand-up comic is going to poke fun at that. But in the day-to-day stuff, do you see an opportunity to really address, some of the issues you're talking about, for example?
Well, you're going to see a little bit of both, because the truth is, we can't deny that part of the reason she's in the situation she's in is because she's trans.
Right.
And we're not interested in sugarcoating anything. And the truth of the matter is, nowadays, you still have a huge percentage of trans youth who isn't accepted by their family. And you look at the data on that, and you look at the fact that 41% of trans people have attempted suicide. And the main reason has nothing to do with any sort of personal problems. It has to do with the fact of how society and specifically our families treat us.
Absolutely.
So we are not interested in shying away from that, because that informs why Shona is in the position she's in, and why her day-to-day life is the way it is. One of the things which I didn't even realize was kind of a little bit of a trope until it was pointed out is Shona actually has a part-time job at an LGBT center. And the reason Hayden chose to do that is to highlight the issue of how hard it is for trans people to find employment, whereas only places that are specifically meant to service the community are the ones actually employing us regularly.
Right.
So I didn't see that so much as a trope as a sad reality of what it's like to live trans.
Yeah.
So we're not interested in sugarcoating that, but definitely on a day-to-day basis, especially around her friends, that doesn't matter. Her friends just see her, especially Cameron, Huey, and Betsy, just see her as Shona, their friend. And, sometimes she's going to experience things in the real world. And you know what? She's going to have people who are going to be behind her, and she's going to have people who, like her family, who sadly are not going to be behind her. And even though there's going to be a lot more to Shona, especially with the comedy, than, just being trans, we're not interested with shying away from that, because it's a sad reality. And that's the reason why we create representation, to deal with these issues head on. It's, you can't just put it there and not address it, because then you're not doing a service to the character in the community.
Yeah. And it has, trans representation has made some strides just in the past, I would say, year or two at most. Still have a long way to go, of course. But how do you feel about where it stands now overall? I mean, you've got kind of a long view on it, having been in the business a bit and been around a bit, seen some of this. How do you feel about where it stands now? And is there something in particular that you'd like to have play a part in improving or addressing?
Well, through Gen Zed, hopefully, we're looking at several different avenues as to where it's going to go. My big hope is for it to reach either a cable or a network, specifically a network, or cable, or something actually broadcast, because where we're finding most of the representation, the vast majority of the representation nowadays, is through streaming. It's not through cable. It's Amazon and it's Netflix. Netflix specifically, I think they're about to do their third show with a trans character in it, which is awesome, but I wish it wasn't just Netflix creating representation. I wish it were a little more spread apart. We're starting to see it little by little, where some people are writing characters, but it's not actually coming to fruition. So there's a very long way to go, because it currently seems like it's segregated to specific sections of the industry, and I'd like to see it be a lot more widespread
Yeah.
than just on Netflix and Amazon.
Right. Well, of course, though, you got they have to be careful to do it right too, because Hollywood is not. I'm sure you've realized this. Hollywood is not exactly filled with millions and millions of talented writers with original ideas.
Yeah, exactly.
So
and I think
you don't want to just warm over the old stereotypes.
I think the best stuff actually that's coming out there in more of the network audience in general is coming from people who are actually aware of trans issues. There's a show right now that hopefully it'll actually make it to air that Laverne Cox is in. It didn't get picked up originally during this pilot season, but I think they're retooling it, and it might end up on the air later on this year or next year on CBS. And the reason the showrunners for that show have such a good grasp on trans issues is because their son is trans.
Right.
So they specifically made the choice and were interested in creating trans representation to make a better world for their son.
Yeah.
So you're seeing that from people who are familiar, and I'd like to see just more people, even if showrunners or creators are not familiar, if we want to welcome that representation, but we also want to make sure that it's done authentically and
Absolutely.
Actual trans people are brought into production, and we're not seeing more of the same of which we're still seeing of things coming out like The Danish Girl and About Ray, where it's not representation. It's really more of exploitation of trans stories for cis creators.
Right. And the Danish Girl, that's probably one of the best examples. I mean, they're going to go and do essentially someone who's a transgender icon historically, and they're going to cast a cis actor to play her. What?
And it's not only there, it's also in Stonewall right now.
Yeah.
I mean, they actually put Marsha P. Johnson in there, and they didn't cast an actual trans woman to play her.
Right.
That's why I think a lot of more people in the community are trying to back this other production called Happy Birthday Marsha, which is going to star, I think it's Maya Taylor, I think is her name, a trans actress who's actually a trans woman of color to actually play Marsha P. Johnson.
Right.
And a lot more of the community is rallying around that film, which has a lot less of a Hollywood backing than Stonewall. Thankfully.
I mean, I think the second thing that I saw regarding Stonewall, aside from just, hey, there's this movie coming out called Stonewall that I was vaguely aware of, I came across another activist, Pamela Raintree, who I had on the show a few weeks back. She was actually had a petition to boycott it on her Facebook page. And it was like, I knew nothing about it at the time, but I saw that and I thought, well, that's odd. I'm having her on in a week. I'll have to definitely ask her about that. And yeah, it was just the effort to whitewash that and just erase. It basically became about gay white people.
Exactly.
Is what I've been told,
Yeah, it was trans women of color who actually were at the front and center of Stonewall. It's like, no, it wasn't white gay cis men.
Yeah.
They were actually in the background.
Yeah, exactly.
Stonewall. They weren't in the forefront.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's an interesting time where we're actually seeing progress, but we're still seeing all these different projects that show us that there's a long way to go. We're definitely not anywhere where we can be happy and complacent. I think is the word I'm looking for.
With increased exposure becomes increased ignorance.
Yeah,
or increased awareness exposes increased ignorance.
Increased exploitation, sadly.
Yeah, exactly. So while we're on the topic of movies, I did want to get your take on a different one that I've had, believe it or not, some generally positive but somewhat mixed or interesting response on, and that's the Boy Meets Girl, the film with Michelle Headley.
Oh yeah, I really liked it. You don't see romantic stories told as organically, especially involving trans people and trans women, as that story was. And it really, I don't want to be spoiler about it, but I really like the way that movie ended just because it really showed us that the people that really mattered in her life, saw her as she saw herself and didn't care. Hopefully, if you're listening to this, you'll go and watch that, and maybe you'll understand what I'm trying to say a little bit more in depth. But it did. I remember I went to see it in a theater. It was playing for about a week at a theater close to me here in Burbank, and I was with a couple of other trans women, and God. It was rare to see somebody in the audience who was not crying by the end of that movie.
Right. Now, the characters in Gen Zed simultaneously seem to take on stereotypes as well as challenge them. Seems like you could, because you can sort of sum each character up in 2 words, but obviously there's a lot more to each of the characters than that as well. But I'm curious, just to deal with one stereotype in particular, and I think the character of maybe the character of Huey addresses this somewhat, but I'm curious to get your take on it. Is how do you view the problem of toxic masculinity in our society, and what do you think? How do you think we need to go about addressing it, either as individuals or as a society?
I think one thing that you're going to learn the more you start seeing Huey is we're trying to showcase that this isn't something that is innate. This isn't something that people are born with. This is something that is learned.
Right.
This is very clearly something that our society is teaching people. And in the same way that we can teach, sadly, we've taught men to be this way, we can actually pull people back if, we can just get people to realize what is going on. I hate to put it this way because it's like this is the term that the MRAs, the men's rights activists, and all like the anti. Well,
you have the benefit of the doubt here, so go ahead and say how you wish.
But I like the idea of turning it on its head.
Okay.
And all these people who have actually gone through this process and are sadly victims in a sense of having to take part in toxic masculinity. Yep. I feel like by showcasing what they've gone to, we can kind of red pill them.
Okay.
And show them the truth of why that's happened and the fact that that's not something you were born with. That's not something that's natural. That's something that society has injected on you and created. And, there is a better way to live.
So you are part of a big conspiracy to turn us all into gays and women.
Yes, I definitely. Yes, I am part of the feminist gaming Illuminati.
Okay, awesome.
Some would call us.
Yeah, you'll have to pass my contact info along. I don't want to run on the wrong side of that cadre.
We're always recruiting, and you know what? I do need a new toaster.
So, okay, apart from taking a historically significant acting role, being a pretty big first here, how active are you politically, and do you get involved in a lot of activism or advocacy outside of the show?
So where I find most of my activism is I'm part of a group called Trans Hollywood that is specifically focused on creating positive and authentic representation of trans people both in front and behind the camera within the industry. We're a group of people that aren't just actors, but directors, writers, all different facets within the industry, and are working within the industry to try to actually create better representation by promoting our work and making sure that trans people are involved in trans productions. Okay. And we've had some major successes with reaching out to productions that because of our contacts and working within the industry, we know are occurring before they actually go into production, and hopefully stopping bad representation from occurring during pre-production before it actually goes into production. And, all that's left is reactionary, like what is happening with Stonewall, for example.
Right.
Apart from that, I'm not active on a national level, but if there are things locally I tend to be very, very active and vocal about. For example, when AB 1266, when they were trying to repeal that's the I think it was called the Student Success and Opportunity Act, which was basically a bill in California to ensure that trans kids K through 12 had access to both facilities and programs, academic programs based on their gender identity rather than their assigned at birth gender.
Yes.
I was very active in finding people who were lying to the main public, trying to get signatures to get that bill overturned, and thankfully they did not get enough signatures. We actually were successful in that respect.
Well, we talked about some of the back. So I guess I want to ask you a little bit about yourself personally. You've told me a little bit about some of the animation work you've done, but I'm curious also what some of your own favorite animation or anime series are.
Oh wow.
And I know as an anime fan myself, it's a really broad, open-ended question. So.
Yeah, and I kind of see them distinctly.
Yeah.
Anime, I'm a huge fan of the show called Revolutionary Girl Utena. Oh my god, it's my favorite show of all time because there's so much symbolism and the music is fantastic. It was, I think it was like in the late 90s.
Yeah, I've heard of it. I have not seen that one. That's on my list, but I haven't gotten to it yet.
It's so good. It's only 39 episodes, but oh my gosh, I love it so much, and there's so much queer symbolism in it, and it's amazing. I have nothing but good things to say about it. I try to watch it as often as I can.
Okay.
It's definitely one of my favorites, and I mean, in the American animation or Western animation, it's hard to boil it down. There's a lot that I'm a fan of right now, like Adventure Time and Steven Universe.
Love Adventure Time.
But I grew up on the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles,
okay.
And I gotta say, there's something that occurs deep down in my psyche whenever I hear that theme song.
See, I was just a little bit too old. I came up just before that. So for me, it's like the Super Friends. But I watch that now and I'm like, God, this is awful. I can't believe I watched this as a kid.
Yeah, there's some stuff about like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles that I see now, and I'm just like, wow, why did I not realize how terrible some of the stuff is? But God, I was like so young, and all I wanted to do was play with the action figures.
Oh yeah. So you mentioned transitioning as sort of in your teenage years. So how old, if you don't mind me asking, how old were you when you either first came out or started transitioning?
For me, it's kind of it was a long road. I sadly came out originally I don't like focusing a lot on like specific things, but I do think this is very important to say.
Okay.
Is because I came out, I believe I was 12, late 12 or early 13 when I came out for the first time to my mother, and I actually got put into conversion therapy, which basically caused years of damage that, I mean, still to this day, there are things that kind of click to me when they're occurring subconsciously just because of what I experienced during that quote unquote therapy, because it isn't, it's brainwashing.
No, it's not. Yeah. I mean, it's yes, I agree. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. And that's why one of my personal main concerns in advocacy is focusing and on stopping conversion therapy for minors. I think it's child abuse, and I mean, gosh, I didn't mean to get all depressing.
No, I mean it's important. That's an important point, and I mean it doesn't. I don't even because it does not have a good track record at all. I mean, the success stories are few and far between. If you read them, and I put that word in quotes, it's basically, especially now, I'm speaking, I suppose more from sexual orientation standpoint, but it's kind of like, wow, so you have a gay person who's managed to basically accept living in denial from that point on. It's like, okay, wonderful, you've created closet gays, well done. That's success.
And I just feel really bad for people who are the quote unquote success stories, because I can't help but feel like on their deathbed they're going to be very very depressed people.
Yeah, I mean, I can't believe that they're not just that's no. I mean, how you go through your life that way?
It's depressing, and I mean that's why even in the show I was affected very directly by what happened to Leela Alcorn, and that's why we do such a specific job of addressing it in the show. It's because not just myself but other trans people as part of production were affected by it, and we think the fact that of keeping her story alive and keeping her name alive and keeping that alive is the best way that we're going to tell people this has to change until it actually changes. It's in the trailer we have that poster of her and it says never forget, and even myself as as someone who I am Jewish, if you can't tell
You
by
don't
my
say.
last name,
Yeah.
which is really weird because I've been attacked a lot online ever since that 4chan and 8chan found the Gen Zed promo for being Jewish, and I'm not even a practicing Jew. It's just that's my racial background, I guess.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I see it, and I really have a strong belief in my background and the things that my ancestors went through. And one of the things that was kind of hammered down to me growing up was remember the Holocaust, never forget. And the reason we do that is to make sure that it doesn't happen again. And when I look at Leela, I think of the same thing. We have to keep it in the public eye to make sure that people never forget, because we want to make sure that this doesn't happen to anybody else from here on out. Yeah. It's a huge concern, and I know that was kind of a tangent from your original question.
That's exactly wow. Okay, and I guess there weren't, and again I'm going by the trailer, so what do I know? But it didn't seem like there were a lot of lines. But how difficult, given your background, was was trying to do a scene in which they're doing that whole goofy. I can't say the whole thing. I'm just going to say intervention because I can't remember what you called it. But I mean, did that hit home, or was that just goofy enough that it didn't register?
Some of that hits home, but I'm thankfully the kind of actor who is able to compartmentalize very well.
Okay, yeah.
And so, for me, I can grasp onto it. Mm-hmm. Probably at the time that we were recording it, it was hitting me really hard. Okay. But the moment that we stopped recording, I was just like, okay, let that go. That's not your life anymore. Right. That's just Shona. Yeah. So thankfully I'm kind of able to compartmentalize.
Yeah. Now, okay, so I was gonna ask about the reaction of friends and family, and okay, so I got the initial reaction. Did that change over time, or?
Yeah, and this is kind of the strange thing. I kind of grew up between two different worlds because my parents divorced when I was very young, and my mom's side of my family and my dad's side of the family lived in completely different parts of the world. So I had kind of like living between two different worlds.
Okay, when you say world, what do you mean now? Let's skip the geography here.
My mom's side of the family is from Florida, in Miami specifically, and my dad's side of the family is from out here in California.
Okay, that's opposite sides of the world. That's the only part of the world that's important, so you're on opposite sides of the world. I'm joking, of course, but yes. Okay, so go on, sorry.
The way I like to say it, it's the two states that have a Disney theme park in them, so...
There you go.
I like that.
There's some signs of civilization then, anyway.
So my dad's side of my family, I kind of grew up, my dad was one of four brothers, and so it was a very, and me being assigned male at birth, and that's all they knew about me, it was a very, let's say, chauvinistic growing up environment.
Sure.
In kind of a chauvinistic background, just because that was the world they grew up in and they lived in, and that was kind of what they were telling me about their stories and their lives. So I always had this idea that side of my family was going to be very much the negative reaction, and it turned out to be the complete opposite. My mom's side of the family was, I actually got disowned for a good 7 or 8 years from my entire mom's side of my family when I came out when I was 16, and they realized that I wasn't going to say no to actually dealing with my issues rather than going back into regression therapy or whatever that they called it. Right. And my dad's side of the family was actually very accepting, and we're very open, and we're just like, we're here for you, whatever you need. I understand. And I want to say I was about 16 when I came out for the final time. I'll say it this way. Well, no, I guess I kind of came out separately to the industry.
Yeah, I mean, there's always, it's not this, you don't announce it on national television or anything, so it's a process, but yeah.
Yeah, you could have never finished transitioning, as I like to say.
Yeah.
But so I was about 16, and my dad's side of the family was really, really understanding, and I think partially it was because of the place in the world that they lived in. They were kind of used to it. Most of them living in the Bay Area.
Okay.
You know, it was, I now looking back at it, I kind of see, oh, okay, it was part and parcel. I probably wasn't the first trans person that all of them knew.
And with your mom, like, I take it that your mom's side.
My mom's side of the family is very Orthodox Jewish. So they were the very religious part. And I remember when I came out, I was taken to a rabbi and I got the entire "why can't you just be gay" speech. And I was just like, I don't even like boys. What are you talking about? You know?
Wow.
But cis people, what can you do?
I hear you. You know what? There's a meme going around that even white people are tired of white people's bullshit now, and count me among the cis people that are tired of cis people's bullshit. So now, what about friends and people around outside the family?
You know, for the most part, I kind of had this cutting off point that I say, because I came out around the time that I was actually going to high school in South America, in Venezuela, which is where my mom and my stepfather lived at the time. Okay. And when I graduated from high school, I moved to California to be with my dad and go to college. Okay. And it was at that same time that I was doing that entire move that I started to transition and realize that, you know, I have to deal with my issues rather than compartmentalizing them. So most of my friends who I made starting in college kind of met me knowing about me. So it was a very good cutting off point where it's like, okay, now the only people who are going to be in my life are people who are okay and actually cool.
Right.
And I kind of, you know, I did see some people back from Venezuela ever since. And I want to say about 75% was negative until probably about 2 or 3 years ago. And thanks to Facebook, I've kind of reconnected with some people. And I find that nowadays they're a lot more open-minded, but that's probably because most of them have moved to the States and actually know better.
Right. Well, and again, just within the last year or two, there have been a lot of strides with, you know, media representation, everything else, being more outspoken, and not just Laverne Cox, but Janet Mock, and of course, Caitlyn, for better or worse. You know, I have nothing against anybody. I'm vaguely aware that she's pissing a lot of people off lately. But it's a good story. I mean, it's still, in my opinion, it's still net a good story to put it out there and get people thinking about it. But
yeah, and I'm glad people are talking about it, because the more people talk about the more we move forward, for better or worse. It started the conversation. So regardless of, you know, what she does need to improve upon, she's started the conversation. We have a jumping off point.
Right. And I mean, for so long, and it's, I mean, within the LGBT movement, I mean, let's face it, that's been an LG movement primarily for the longest time. The issue of marriage has dominated that discussion. And now that is settled, to the extent that it is settled, a couple of clerks in Kentucky notwithstanding, where do you think the fight needs to go from here? What is the number one issue you want to see addressed next?
You know, I can't break it down to a number one. I think one of the things I'm most concerned about is we really do have an epidemic of trans women being murdered, more specifically trans women of color, primarily.
Yes.
And the first thing that needs to happen immediately is all these murders need to start being addressed as hate crimes.
Yeah.
That's by far the one immediate thing that I think prosecutors can start doing right now.
Right.
Because it is a hate crime. They have to realize it's an intersectional hate crime. It's both transphobic and racist at the same time.
Yeah.
And it has to be addressed.
Yeah, we had a case not too long ago here in Detroit, and it was basically chalked up to a drug deal gone wrong. And yes, I suppose it could have been, but that was an awful quick conclusion, all things considered. Just saying, officer, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, they don't treat
because all of that, those conclusions are brought about because of stereotypes. It's the idea that, you know, if a trans woman, especially a trans woman of color, is walking around with a condom, she must be a sex worker.
Right.
You know, that is not rational thinking. That is biased and bigoted thinking.
Yes,
that's not rational in any way.
Right.
So that's definitely something we can do immediately, and I'd really like to see that, because as far as the damage that we can repair, we can't repair death.
Right.
I'm very concerned about ending reparative therapy and making sure that trans kids have the proper access and the proper access to both facilities and educational programs in schools. I'm glad that that's kind of taken a very front and center position right now. I'm glad that that's being addressed more so than it has ever been. That's a big concern of mine. Also, I really think there's a lot that is kind of in the transitional point too. For example, the K through 12 access, and as well as making sure that trans-related medical care is not excluded from healthcare providers.
Right.
I can tell you personally, I would probably have a pretty nice bank account if that issue would have been resolved 15 years ago, but sadly it wasn't resolved 15 years ago. And you know what? I'd like to see trans people in the future not have to deal with that same bullshit.
Absolutely.
So those are my main things. I'd really like to see, I think the time is gone for ENDA. We don't really need ENDA at this point. What we need is sexual orientation and gender identity to be basically put into civil rights legislation as it is in California.
Okay. Well, how does that differ? That's interesting that you say it that way. How does that differ from ENDA then? Aside from the fact that the proposed version of ENDA dropped trans people off completely by the time it made it to the floor.
Oh gosh, yeah.
So aside from trans people being the first bargaining chip that's thrown, under the bus there, how does California address it then?
Well, the way California addresses it is a protected civil right along with race, religion, ethnicity. It is in California. It's blended into civil rights regulations,
okay,
and
so
I think that needs to be done.
That trickles down to every other ordinance, basically. If there's a discrimination ordinance, it's covered because by virtue of that being a protected class.
Exactly, because we can pass ENDA, but that's not going to stop bathroom bills from people trying to pass bathroom bills.
Right.
That's still going to be legal. We need to make sure that we're protecting people's access from both public accommodations, housing, apart from just employment.
Right.
So.
Yeah, that's a good point too, because it addresses it. Just like you can get married, but you can still be fired the next day. You can be employed, but you can still be denied housing, denied medical care. There's still all of that. So that's a good point. That ENDA is very narrow in its focus.
Yeah, exactly. It's. I think the time for ENDA is. I really believe the time for ENDA is gone, and that's why I think a lot of organizations are starting to shy away from really pushing ENDA forefront. There are probably only one or two organizations that are really focusing on it, and it's not to say the wrong thing, but it's probably the organizations that least like the idea of change.
Okay, you can say it.
Well, it's no secret that the trans community in HRC have.
I knew you were going to say it. I knew it. I didn't want to say it. I knew you were going to say it. Yes, absolutely. I've had many people on, and even when I did my blog before, no shortage of criticism for the HRC for sure.
Oh,
and rightly so.
I'm not going to say that they're not doing the right thing from here on out, but the truth is, we can't deny that HRC's history with trans people has been. You can't rewrite history. You really can't.
No,
it's kind of, there's a lot of trust that really does have to be regained.
Absolutely.
That, you have the words HRC do have kind of a bad taste in most trans people who have been in the movement for the last 10 years. It's just the way things are. Just the way we don't sugarcoat things on the show, and we don't want to sugarcoat the daily struggles that Shona goes with. I have no interest in sugarcoating, LGBT history.
Right, absolutely. So I got to put you on the spot. Who's your candidate for 2016?
I feel sad because I really wanted Elizabeth Warren to run. But at the moment,
Liz Warren too.
I'm kind of, my favorite right now is Bernie Sanders. I think if Joe Biden jumps in, I might support him just because I think he's more electable than Bernie Sanders.
Really?
I really do think he's more electable. I think he has a better name recognition.
I don't see it. I don't get me wrong. You're not the first person I've heard this say. I just, from my point of view, I just don't see it. I mean, I don't know. I mean, of course, look at who he would potentially be running against. I don't think there's anybody vaguely electable on that side. But still, I just look at between them. I mean, Clinton, that was probably the best thing going for was she was arguably the most electable. Sanders, of course, you know, we've all been hearing what he's had to say. And there's been a lot of momentum, although, God, I have learned not to trust early momentum.
Yeah, and I think the big thing is that when people are putting stuff in Bernie Sanders' face, I think it's more out of concern for him to actually make changes. For example, I think the Black Lives Matter movement made a difference by going out there and actually being in his face. Yep. I don't think it was ever to say you are a terrible person, but it was, hey, you need to address this situation. Yeah. And he has since then.
Right. So that's the funny thing is I didn't get that at first either. And the way that somebody explained to me is it's kind of like when Bill Clinton was running and the gay community went right after him because of all the candidates. He was the one who would perhaps be most open to change in terms of addressing LGBT issues. And now they went after Sanders figuring that, I mean, why go after Ted Cruz? What's he going to do for you? Why go after, any of those other guys? But you go after Sanders and he will address that. And he did, he reacted very, very positively to that, I think. He handled the situation very well.
Exactly.
Certainly better than most of the people on Facebook did.
Yeah, and that's the way I personally always saw it. And I mean, it's kind of the same people who basically threw, I hope this is how you say her name. Mm-hmm. I've just seen her on Twitter and Facebook. Gen Zed Gutierrez, who was the heckler, the so-called heckler, because I don't like that name.
Right.
That heckled Obama at that reception a couple months ago, specifically talking about trans women in detention centers, specifically immigrant trans women.
Right.
And the fact is, there's a reason it wouldn't make a difference for her to do that to somebody like Ted Cruz.
Yeah.
But the fact that she did it to Obama, and the thing that bugs me is that people acted about her in a sort of way like she just sees Obama at the gym and she can address it in any other situation, not knowing that this is probably the only time she's ever going to be able to have a face-to-face with this guy.
Absolutely. And I would say I wouldn't, I mean, yeah, you're right. Everyone loves to throw the word heckle around, but I would say called out. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's how I saw it.
And no matter what no matter what the administration says, they kind of jumped on that pretty quickly after that incident happened. Right. And I think she should be thanked more than she should be criticized.
Right.
So.
Right. Well, I mean,
that's just my 2 cents.
Yeah. No, obviously this may come off as somewhat of a dumb question based on the last hour we've been talking about, but I'm curious how big a role or how outsized a role specifically LGBT issues play in your overall list of voting issues, or what other considerations do you are important to you then?
Well, here's the bottom line for me. Even because I have a lot of family that is socially liberal but fiscally conservative, and I kind of understand that. I do understand that perspective, but even if, let's say, fiscally we were to be better off, which I am not agreeing on.
Let me let you in a little secret. The fiscal conservatives are wrong. They're wrong.
That's exactly why I give this disclaimer. Wrong. Even if the fiscal conservatism would work, I wouldn't vote for someone who was on the Republican side, because I don't care if you actually are going to bring the country to a greater place. Right. If I don't have a place in that country, I can't vote for you.
Right.
Even if I know that we're going to be worse off as a country with someone who is more socially liberal, I'm more keen to vote for them, because at least however bad things get, I know that I'm part of the social fabric and I am wanted in that society, no matter how bad it might get. It's kind of like when you get married, for better or for worse, but if you don't have a place in the discussion, then who cares what the state of the country is?
Right, exactly. Last bit, and this was one I put in because I got into a bit of trouble myself on Facebook recently, because we all get a big mouth sometimes, and I don't know what the heck crawled up my ass on that particular day, but I got to put this out there just in case anyone who was part of that conversation is listening. What is your number one pet peeve then, coming from I guess opponents or politicians? I think we can fill that in, but so let's focus on allies. What is from the cis het community? What do we get wrong? What do we really need to stop doing, or how can we be better at support?
So what I always try to make sure people understand is that ally is not a self-identity. Mm-hmm. Ally is something you earn. Okay. A big pet peeve of mine is when trans people or any other minority, or this has happened in the Black Lives Matter movement, when people who are not part of that minority start criticizing the movement that they're not part of, saying, hey, no, but I'm behind you. It's like, no, if you're trying to talk over the community that is being affected, right, you are not an ally. Right. Don't tell me Don't tell me that that's your identity, because ally is not an identity. It's something you earn. So that's something that I don't think people understand still to this day. I hear a lot of, hey, I'm saying this as an ally, but, well, if you're trying to talk over trans people, or you're trying to tell trans people, or, again, any other minority, what is better for them, you're not being an ally. You're being an apologist is what you're being. Right.
It's the old, I'm not racist, but... Exactly. I'm not sexist, but...
Gotcha. Yeah, it's if you're... That's why, for me, I feel like when we're talking about issues that affect a specific community, if I'm not part of that community, I'd rather tell people, hey, listen to people within that community who are being outspoken about it, rather than, hey, here's my opinion. Because you know what? If I'm not part of that community, my opinion really doesn't matter, and I'm being more of an ally by amplifying the voices of people within that community rather than injecting my own opinion.
Right.
A really big pet peeve of mine is I don't expect everybody to be perfect. I expect even allies to make mistakes. But the most important thing is, when you've been called out by a minority group, or, a group that you find yourself talking over, is, just step back from it. Just realize kind of what you've done and act to that, and take that into yourself. I always say my biggest problem with the RuPaul conversation that happened in the last couple of years is not the language that he used so much as the reaction he had to being called out. Had he just said, I'm sorry, I didn't realize this was so offensive, and kind of left it at that, I think it would have gone a lot further than basically just saying, hey, screw the trans community, I'm going to do my own thing, and continue to be offensive.
So finishing up, Gen Zed, where can people go to find this?
Well, for right now, you can find us. Our Twitter is Gen, Gen _Zed, ZED on Twitter. GenZed.org is the website. Let me just verify that. Yeah, GenZed.org. It's GenZed.org. I believe it's Gen Zed Comedy on Tumblr. We're also Gen Zed Comedy on Facebook. We're kind of in a weird position right now where one of the producers of Futurama is trying to take the show to TV, hopefully. Knock on wood, all fingers crossed. So things are really changing right now, but we do have animators who are working on it, and hopefully by the end of the year, you'll see the pilot. And from there, if a network or a cable station picks it up, things will move from there. But we're going to keep working on it whatever way we can. I mean, we've recorded about 60 pages worth of dialogue, and it's all mostly mixed. So you're going to see it one way or another. It just depends on where.
And GenZed.org would probably be the best place to find out airtimes and where it's going then?
Yep, and make sure to follow us on Twitter and like us on Facebook, I guess. That's still a thing, liking.
Absolutely. Well, Julie, thanks so much for coming on. I really appreciate you taking your time.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you, Eddie. Always a pleasure.
Once again, I'd like to thank Julie so much for coming on the program. I had a great time talking to her. Definitely, guys, check out Gen Zed, both at genzed.org, on YouTube, like it on Facebook. It's a great project. Support the hell out of it. Check it out and follow it. Hopefully this does get picked up. It's a great opportunity for positive representation. And as always, if you have any questions or comments about anything you've heard here tonight or suggestions for future shows, guests, or topics, please feel free to email me at niceguy9418@usa.com. Friend me on Facebook at Eddie Cabot. Follow me on Twitter at NiceGuyEddieCab. Follow me on Tumblr at NiceGuyEddieCabot, or leave a comment on my blog at eddiecabot.blogspot.com. Really love hearing from y'all, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. Keep on listening to Rainbow Radio.